for such a discussion, given you have a problem with the G20, you have somewhat of a problem with the G7, which doesn't include.
I think on the G20 is, no, the G7 is certainly not the right forum. I don't know what Larry thinks. Larry's been part of the G7 for many years in various capacities, but as far as I understand, no, it would not be the right forum. The G20 might be better, but now having this crisis that divides the world. Some ad hoc group for reforming the world trade rules could be another. And I don't think it would actually face much opposition to do that. If one thing could be useful now is to sort of not continue playing on the same agenda that would naturally calls for the same conflicts and has a past. I think one should turn around the agenda, set a modest, it's not a modest goal, but it's a precise, well-defined goal. And I'm confident that most of the world would adhere to this.
I think,
please.
If there was one thing that I'd like to be able to ask Alberto today, it would be about the domestic political economy in major countries of support for responsible global policies, and what his thoughts are as to why it has deteriorated so much and what could be done to rebuild it, because I think it's a central challenge. I think there's a central challenge of finding ways of connecting a global agenda that looks like it benefits people in Detroit and Dusseldorf more than it benefits people in Davos. And I was particularly encouraged. I thought the best thing that happened in economic diplomacy in the last couple of years was the agreement on global tax cooperation, because the idea there was that, plutocratic capital can run, but it can't hide, and that it's going to have to pay taxes to somebody, no matter what it does. Unfortunately, the U.S. Congress is looking like it's not going to do the things that are necessary to enable it. I read a statistic today that just incredibly discouraged me. At the last U.S.-ASEAN summit, the U.S. committed for infrastructure and global integration $150 million. And the author of this rather clever piece, might have been in the FT, Lionel, pointed out that that was enough to buy 1.5 kilometers of the Tokyo subway. And I thought it was a dramatic way of pointing up the inadequacy of what it was that we were doing.
Indeed. Do you have...
Just to agree that we need to find a way to rebuild that cooperation. We face, right now an urgent problem, particularly in developing countries with increasing the food prices. Ukraine and Russia are big producers of wheat. Prices of wheat have increased by 70% in the past 12 months. That has spilled over to other commodities. This is a huge humanitarian crisis for the developing world. Past this, of course, we need again the cooperation to think about climate change, and there's a whole host of uncertainties that will need to be addressed, and for that we will need strong cooperation.
I'm conscious of time. But I think it would be useful to close off this conversation, which has been really fascinating, to talk about, and hopefully this is relevant, not least to Alberto, that the contribution and the role of academic research and people with academic backgrounds, strong academic backgrounds, going into policy making. And Larry, obviously, you occupied two very serious roles, well, actually more than two, in successive administrations. What are your thoughts?
I've got both wise guy thoughts and serious thoughts.
Try the wise guy first.
As a professor at Harvard, the worst thing you can do is to sign your name to something you didn't write yourself. As a rising bureaucrat in the Treasury, the more frequently you're able to do that, the more effective you are as an operator. As a professor, you're judged by the best thing you do. And if you write articles that aren't very interesting or that turn out to be wrong, nobody much cares. If you do some things that are great. As a policymaker, you're likely to be judged by your biggest blunder. And so the art of policymaking is profoundly different from the art of being a professor. And that's why it always seems to me that Alberto had it right. Alberto wasn't trying to kibitz ever on the next piece of legislation that was passing through the Congress or was passing through the European Parliament. He understood that sitting at Harvard or Bocconi, he had no comparative advantage in that. He was trying to define the agenda and the frameworks that would be used for the next 20 years. And I think that's immensely important. I guess that, and I think Alberto, from the conversations I had with him towards the very end of his life, was, I think, moving in a direction that was more micro and less macro. The research he was doing with Stephanie Stancheva on the attitudes of actual people who don't actually think in terms of the categories that economists think in terms of. So if you sort of ask them about, like, what do you think the trade-off is between efficiency and equity, they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. But if you put it in terms of what do you think about this and what do you think about that, there is a preference system there that you can understand. I thought that was fundamentally important research. I think there's fundamentally important research to be done on why government is so often so ineffective at doing really important things well, and that as more and more things are going to fall into the remit of government, getting it to function better is going to become that much more important. But above all, I think Alberto's influence shows that while everybody in government feels themselves incredibly busy and incredibly decisive, they're actually operating within a framework that was created by the prevailing social science understandings of 10 years before. And that's what makes his work so profoundly important and live on after him.
Your thoughts, Prime Minister, given, I've always thought that substance mattered, but I'm just a journalist.
Yeah, substance matters. Frankly, I kind of try not to ask myself how important has been my previous experience as a professor of economics. And people ask me that, so I had to answer. I would say that more than thinking about models and the assumptions behind them, what I got from my previous experience is the way people in academia interact. First, if you are asked a question, you answer. You don't fudge. You answer. And if you don't have an answer, you say, I don't know. That's surprising in the rest of the world, but it's normal. It's normal in the university and academic profession. Second, if you give an answer, you explain why. And I never thought or asked or assumed that I would be taken seriously for being what I am. So you just answer, and better answer clearly, otherwise people won't believe you. And third, and that pertains exclusively to the policy making, but also in a sense, you got to be consistent with what you say. I mean, if you say that certain things are going to happen, they must happen, because credibility, and now I speak, I'm sorry, as a former central bank governor, is the essence. That's why I always said, stay within your mandate. It's a different discussion, but that's part of the central bank governor or president credibility. That's the same thing. It's part and parcel of your policymaker credibility. You have a mandate which is given by the voters, the electorate, or in my case, by the President of the Republic and the Parliament that voted for my government. And that's the mandate. And I stay within that. But more importantly, if anything, facts have to follow words. Thank you.
It's going to be hard to beat that payoff line.
I will agree fully.
I think so.
I think, and especially in the context of central banks and central bank independence, on which Alberto wrote, and it's super important that we stick to our mandates, and they are very clear.
Silvana, you have the last word. It's been a great pleasure to moderate this conference, an honor, and thank you very much, everyone on the panel, for contributing to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.